Evet, bir akademisyenimiz var, Sayın Slye.
Evet, kendisi burada.
Evet.
Slye, please.
Thank you. Hello. I wrote a 10-minute speech, but since there might be translation, I'll try to shorten it.
I can make a summary after your speech.
I think that's best, so let's do that. Okay. Ronald Reagan said, "We live in a world that's lit by lightning. So much is changing and will change, but so much endures and transcends time." It is true. As we look at the world around us, we see how things are always changing. Empires rise and fall. Wars are won and lost, and famous or infamous leaders come and go. At the same time, military and communication technologies are constantly developing, as well as modes of social and political organization. We have learned through bitter experience that those nations who can adapt faster to change are the ones that gain an incomparable advantage over their opponents, whether used for good or evil. In our case, when we look at Russia, throughout history, the Russian state and its agents incorporated emerging military technology and organizational design sufficiently fast and well to not only stubbornly maintain a position as a rival or wannabe rival to real-world powers, but also to lock its surrounding nations into a perpetual disadvantage. In the area of military technology and in the area of organizational design, for example, we have the story of Peter the Great, whose modernization efforts and centralizing reforms increased the efficiency of the Russian state. This set up his successors with the foundation they needed for maintaining a perpetual advantage over their smaller neighbors. Finally, with regard to psychological methods, the Russians are skilled manipulators of mass consciousness and public opinion with considerable practice in the persuasion and coercion of elites or specific useful individuals. They will use every single tool in this skill set without hesitation to relentlessly prevent and disrupt any potential sympathy or support for their targets, as well as to steadily undermine and ultimately break the target's your own will to resist. After a certain point, the target nation will see all the disadvantages it has in relation to Russia's advantages. The target is expected to give up, so far as sacrificing its very identity. This is called the demand for complete and total submission, even to the point of dissolution of the ego or the soul of the nation. The conquered nation is expected to become Russian, to Russify. All the more so when the target society's social fabric has been severely damaged and ruptured, with elites waging war against national patriots and their own brothers and sisters on Russia's behalf, and when everyone knows there's no reliable international support. And especially when the target society has been repeatedly traumatized by the horrors of the methods of Russian conquest and subjugation. But you cannot allow yourself to be demoralized, because then you will no longer be Circassians or Chechens and so on. Then you will become slaves, third-class Russians thanking Moscow for introducing your ancestors to civilization. Then you will be sending your sons and maybe daughters to die in all the future wars of this empire with no human values, the wars it will wage on other innocent nations to kill those nations' elderly and women and children and brilliant young men, all while telling yourself it's the right thing to do. So, if your desire is to remain a moral being and save and cultivate your own real national identity, then you must never allow yourself to be demoralized You must never give up your identity or your nationality, but how can you push back against such an overwhelming power? Let's call a spade, such a relentless force of evil. First of all, please do not form a small band of warriors and rush impetuously into battle, brandishing sabers against an entire navy with warships and an army with heavy artillery. Rather, organize and strategize. Second, use the Russians' own strategies against them. And finally, remember, evil relies heavily on coercion and illusion. Truth has the power to expose the lies. In terms of using the Russian strategies against them, Russians are comparatively weak. They are far weaker than NATO or the US or China. They could not withstand a week of direct combat against a peer rival. So while the Russians are using their relative strengths for relentlessly harassing and attacking their weaker neighbors, they use the weapons of the weak, like influence campaigns, psychological manipulation, disruption operations, and preying on the weak to target the relative weaknesses of their rivals and undermine the international prestige and domestic will to challenge Russia. If we look at the Russian strengths compared to Circassians or other Caucasians, they have superior numbers, technology, and resources, as well as institutional memory, which you cannot do much about. But they also have a clear strategic goal and superior organization, as well as superior networks, which are things you can do something about. You can create your own clear strategic goal, your own superior organizations, your own superior networks. If we look at the Russians' relative strengths compared to the USA or NATO, we can also see how they maximized some tools of the weak to offset their disadvantages with NATO and the USA. So you can also do a similar thing. You can maximize some of your advantages. I recommend that you focus heavily on the psychological dimension. First, internally, stop letting the enemy tell you who you are. We cannot organize. We need the ones who destroyed us to protect us. Everyone else will let us down. Only, I hear these things all the time, but don't think like that. Only you know who you are. Only you know your history. Your history can show you what you're capable of, and you can write your story how you want it written. You can show people what you're capable of. And you will be able to help other countries, organizations, and key individuals to see that supporting you is in their interests. And if they are reluctant or unwilling to see, it is useless to wait around and keep asking. You must raise yourself into a position where they cannot refuse. It's really that simple. But how can you do any of this if you have no common goal? And if those of you with the same goal are divided, how can you confront the Leviathan when you can barely get 5 people to sit at the same table? In my opinion, Circassians must be united in purpose, and they must gradually develop some mechanisms to allow everyone to make their contributions to the common cause. To recap, to summarize, the most important tasks seem to be focus on setting a clear goal, develop an effective strategy, build your support networks internally and internationally tirelessly, resolve any conflicts and questions surrounding organizational development, cultivate a culture of mutual respect and unity of purpose, master consensus building, and prioritize the psychological dimension. And I cannot stress this enough. Each nation targeted by Russia must consolidate internally and work with each other. You only have each other to present a united front. Your individual survival depends on collective solidarity. Once you achieve success in these areas, it should become easier to attract the support of reliable external players. And even though everything else will change and keep changing, the adaptive and persistent Circassian nation, God willing, will return home and live forever in its homeland. Thank you.
Sayın Slye bir tarihçi ve özellikle Kuzey Kafkasya halklarının önemli bir isim. Değişimin kaçınılmaz olduğunu ve her şeyin mutlaka değişime uğradığından söz etti. Aynı şekilde imparatorlukların yıkıldığından, parçalarına ayrılacağından, buna tarih sürecinde çeşitli defalarca tanıklık ettiğimizden söz etti. Rusya'nın göründüğünden daha zayıf olduğunu, kendisini güçlü göstermek için her yolu denediğini, psikolojik olarak mücadele yürütmede oldukça mahir olduğunu, aynı şekilde rakiplerini de güçsüz, zayıf, aciz göstermek için yine propaganda, yalan vesaire metotlara başvurduğundan söz etti. Ama şunu biliyoruz ki Amerika Birleşik Devletleri ve NATO ve Çin Rusya'dan kat ve kat daha güçlü. Bu bilinen bir gerçek. Kimsenin inkar edemeyeceği bir gerçek. Rusya belli alanlarda elde etmiş olduğu askeri teknoloji üstünlüklerini genel olarak her alana yayabilmiş değil. Ne ekonomisi, ne demokrasisi, ne insan hakları, ne hukuku askeri teknolojilerdeki elde ettiği başarı kadar gelişmiş değil. Ama yine de diğer ulusları, diğer devletleri kötüleyerek kendisini daha haklı göstermeye çalışarak halkını ya da etki alanına almak istedikleri kişileri etkilemeye çalıştığını ifade edebiliriz. Bununla birlikte Çerkezlerle alakalı da bazı önemli değerlendirmeler yaptı. Hepimizin de ders alması gereken hususlar var elbette. Biz birlik olamıyoruz. Olamadığımız için de tabii ki bu herkesin dikkatini çekiyor. Bugünkü konuşmacıların pek çoğunun vurguladığı bir hususu Sayın Slye de yaptı. Birlikte hareket etmek, diyalog kültürünü oluşturabilmek, farklılıkları ya da farklı düşünceleri daha çok hoş görebilmek ve ortak zeminde bir şeyler yapabilmenin yollarını aramak zorunda olduğumuzu ifade etti. Buradan tabii ki hepimizin, her birimizin, Çerkez toplumu olarak her birimizin çıkarması gereken önemli dersler var. Bugünkü konuşmaların tamamında ortak mesaj olarak bu vardı diyebiliriz. Ama çaresiz değiliz, onu da ifade ediyor. Bu söylediklerimiz işte moralinizi bozmasın diye vurguluyor. Evet, yapılabilecek çok şey var. Moral bozmaya gerek yok. Zaten umudumuz olduğu için buradayız. Yarınlara umutla bakabilmek için buradayız. Bu şekilde ifade edebiliriz Sayın Slye'nin açıklamalarını.